This is Talking Drupal, a bi-weekly chat about web design and development by a group of guys with one thing in common. We love Drupal. We record this live on Wednesday afternoons in a Google Hangout. Visit us at talkingdrupal.com. This is episode 109, Wednesday, December 2nd, 2015. Today we're talking about chef. And we're not talking about chef as in cooking, right, guys?
No.
Oh man, I got really excited. You mean we're not talking about food?
We have Chef Ramsey joining us today. So, welcome, guys. We have with us, as usual, John Picozzi from Oomph. Hi, John.
Good afternoon.
What is shaking in your neck of the woods these days?
Oh man, what is shaking? Everything is shaking. We are busy, finishing up for the end of the year. As per the norm this time of year, you know, in the house we're getting ready for Christmas. So, all sorts of stuff going on.
Get your tree up yet?
No, that's hopefully this weekend. We'll see.
Is that real or artificial?
No, it's real. It's real. We go out into the woods and cut it down, and yeah, it's real.
Good. I can picture like Christmas vacation. That's how I picture you romping into the woods. Laughing in the background, we also have Nick Laughlin from Enlightened Design.
Good afternoon. And we actually do have our Christmas tree up. It's all I can do to keep my wife from putting the tree up in November 1st. So as soon as Thanksgiving is over, the tree goes up and gets decorated.
Same here.
Yeah, it's a big deal for her, so we put it up pretty quick.
Yeah, we do it usually the weekend after Thanksgiving sometime, and this year it was on Friday. When you get kids who are not around so much anymore, it's a little bit harder to schedule that event now.
You can imagine.
Yeah, and so we also have a guest with us today to talk about chef. We have Ron Lipke. Welcome, Ron.
Thanks for having me.
And to tell you a little bit about Ron was in the Navy as a nuclear power plant operator for about 9 years on nuclear subs. And after that, moved on to managing automation and process control for a large hydrogen plant. 2010 made a pretty dramatic career switch, starting as an engineer for a startup in Princeton, and most recently has been working at Jero as a principal systems engineer, building automation into cloud architecture and setting up new and supporting legacy applications for systems such as Mesos clusters, which are used by many big names such as Twitter. And there you go, Ron.
That's me. That was pretty good. That's
you. It's you in a nutshell, huh?
Yeah, that covers everything. And I don't have my tree up yet.
Okay. So we have an interesting topic today because we're kind of going off of our usual Drupal specific stuff, and talking about Chef, which is really a system automation tool or configuration tool. So we just wanted to do something a little different today. And we have a great guy to talk about it with us. So let's talk about what is Chef at its basic level here. What is it?
Well, Chef kind of falls into the umbrella of a configuration management tool like Puppet, Ansible. Salt is another one that's getting a lot more popular in the space. And at its core, it basically allows you to manage your infrastructure with code instead of spinning up an instance physically and configuring it through scripts or manually doing stuff. And the benefit of defining your infrastructure as code is that it can be source controlled, so it can be audited. Everyone knows what's been done, what state your infrastructure is in, and it also allows it to be repeated across different systems. So You can spin up things in if you're working in the cloud, you can spin up things in other cloud services. You can spin up things in your data center. You can spin up things in a VM, and pretty much it's the same tool, it's the same code, and it gives you that advantage.
So, what are some of the use cases, like basic few use cases that someone would use Chef for, and maybe geared towards our audience, which isn't necessarily people managing huge infrastructures, but maybe a step down from that?
Sure. There's still benefit for using Chef even for small, for smaller fleets. Even like personally, I use a Chef at home too. So whenever I get a development machine, I bootstrap it with Chef. It sets up all my applications, all my dot files, and I do all that through Chef. I manage my a media server and stuff. So it can go from really small use to huge Facebook-sized implementations. So I would say for something for your guys, a user base, like Chef is good for spinning up things in different environments that require different configurations throughout those environments. Like say you have a different database, a connection string in your dev environment, and then in your QA environment, in your staging and production. So with Chef, you can use the conditionals and logic in your code to say, if you're spinning up an instance or a node in this environment, use this database, a connection string. Or if it's a dev environment, you can say, make all these users a pseudo users, because it's dev, you don't care, you can let them do whatever they want. But then in any of the higher environments, all those users are read-only. Mm-hmm. Or if you're setting up, say, Drupal site or something, you can have it install all the things you need, all the dependencies, all the package versions. You can restrict those versions. You can ensure that anything that you need to support your application, any of its dependencies are going to be on the server, and they're going to be the same each and every single time that you're running.
So one of the major pluses for Chef is that you have a known state.
Sure. Yeah.
There's a lot more. There's speed of setting something up. Most developers have configured a system at one point or another, and it sometimes takes a good 20 minutes, half an hour, hour or two, depending on how complex what you're setting up is. But with Chef, once you've got it figured out, it's a fairly straightforward process each time, and everybody has the same system.
Now, so in an example of like, so from like me, if I have 10 websites running on 10 different shared hosts, let's say 5 of them are on DigitalOcean, 2 of them are on Media Temple, can I use Chef to get all of those systems sort of set up with these different providers?
Oh, yeah, sure.
Yeah.
The tool that Chef uses is it's called Knife, and it's located. There's some really corny like food named things in the Chef toolbox. Right. Knife being one of them. So you interact with Chef and your nodes from your local workstation. You can also do some management from the web UI on the Chef server, but for the most part, you're interacting with your nodes from your workstation. So there are Knife plugins that allow you to interact with pretty much every service out there. There's a DigitalOcean Knife plugin, there's AWS, Azure, Google Compute, and those allow you to bootstrap a node and configure it exactly how you want it from the command line.
So probably one thing to point out here, and correct me if I'm wrong, you're most likely working with an unmanaged system. You're not going to be using this if you have a managed VPS or you have a shared host with GoDaddy or something. What you're doing with Chef is setting up an automated way to manage those nodes yourself.
Yes.
So as long as you can get an unmanaged box, Even if it's a VPS, whether or dedicated, either way, you can use Chef.
Yeah, you basically need SSH access to that machine. If you don't have, at a minimum, SSH access, then you're pretty much not using Chef. But then as far as Chef actually communicating with the Chef server, it's agentless, and basically when it connects to the Chef server, it's a pull mechanism. The server isn't pushing anything to your infrastructure unless you want it to, and it works over the HTTP API to the Chef server. So it's not SSHing. You don't need to set up keys or anything. As long as the Chef client is on the agent and the PEM file for the Chef server exists, you're good to go.
So I actually have a couple questions here. One is it sounds like Chef is very much geared towards the DevOps guy that's running a bunch of different servers and wants to be able to easily scale them or spin them up and with a certain set of configuration. Are there any other? I mean, you said you use it to kind of configure your own machine if you get a new machine. Are there any other sort of use cases for Chef other than those two?
So in the last a few years, Chef has grown kind of really quickly, actually, from what it started out as, which was pretty much a simple config management tool that was basically replacing a bunch of shell scripts to when you join a company and you got to learn how everything works, and they hand you a folder with a whole bunch of shell scripts in it that have been changed over time or whatever. But Chef was solving that issue where everybody's on the same page. Everything is source controlled, and it's using Chef is all Ruby, so it's using a common language to define your infrastructure instead of across the platforms, whether you're doing a Windows or Linux, you're using SCCM and PowerShell and DSC on Windows, and then on Linux you're using a shell scripts. And so it's giving you a way to define all of that with a common language. So as far as configuring servers on the fly or bootstrapping on new nodes, Chef also has added a couple new things into their offering. They offer an analytics package now. So whatever a Chef nodes are registered with the Chef server, it's gathering all the data about that node, and it's offering it to you in an analytics package with dashboards and everything. They now have a compliance tool for PCI compliance, security compliance, and they're adding certifications as they go along. It's kind of a new offering. There's Chef Delivery, which is a fully managed software development lifecycle pipeline manager, from writing code to spinning up the infrastructure it's going to run on, to managing that infrastructure in a test-driven manner once it's up and running. So size of the system really is not really isn't that important. If you're doing 10 nodes or you're doing 1,000 nodes, I mean, Chef still has value in ensuring that what you're spinning up is configured exactly the way you want it each and every time.
And I think one thing that's really useful with Chef for somebody that's managing a smaller amount, or even if it's not a smaller amount, you just have different clients that have different needs. One of the things that can be useful is if there's a security update to something that's not Drupal. For example, you're using Solar or you're using some other package, and you want to see how that update interacts. You can use a new server, spin it up with Chef, upgrade it, test it, see what happens, and if it goes wrong, you can start over and try a different path. So it's a very quick way to test updates. And I can even see a world where you're using Chef to test Drupal updates, because then you don't have to have a dev environment that's always set up. because you can sometimes spin them up pretty quickly. You just have a multi-purpose server that can be configured for different clients when you need it.
So how hard is it to use Chef? Like for someone who's never, because John said that this is kind of for a DevOps guy. I mean, a lot of people that listen to the show, and a lot of us, we're DevOps guys. I mean, we're probably consider ourselves more like developers than DevOps, but we're all doing DevOps all the time.
Right.
So how hard is it? What is the learning curve for using a tool like this?
So I would say out of all of the offerings in the config management space, Chef probably has the steepest learning curve, and I would say that because I think it offers the most power and flexibility. So Chef is pure Ruby, and the Chef DSL is pretty much, it's Ruby. So you can use pure Ruby in any Chef recipe anywhere, which makes it very flexible because you don't have to learn a Puppet language. You don't have to learn any of the Python templating languages like you do with Ansible and Salt. But that being said, if you're coming from a pure ops background, like I was, Chef can be kind of daunting because you really have to know software development. You got to know how to write good code. You have to know how to manage, the life cycle of a cookbook is basically writing a piece of software. So Chef is usually taken on board a little bit easier for dev guys who are more devs than ops.
Okay.
It's more of a programmer's mentality than a sysadmin's, if that makes any sense.
It does. So not ever using Chef at all. I'm not going into a graphical user interface to do this then.
No. It's you're writing pure code. So
Okay.
it's if you're and all of the Chef toolkit with integration testing and unit testing is all on the command line. So
Okay.
if you're comfortable there, then you'll be fine with Chef.
So
Yeah, and I have to say, as somebody who's going through that process right now, the documentation is pretty fantastic. It, especially coming from a Drupal world where documentation is all community generated, and a lot of the documentation we have is great. I don't see huge amounts of missing stuff.
You're lucky because it used to not be like that. It used to be really bad, actually. And a big part of that was when OpsCode, which is the company that started Chef, who are now just called Chef, they intended Chef from the beginning to be a very unopinionated piece of software. They wanted to put out this tool but not really give anybody direction on how to use it. And in the Wild West days of Chef, that created a lot of confusion because there were so many things that Chef could do, but OpsCode really wasn't saying like, hey, here's some best practices, here's some anti-patterns, do this, but don't do this. And the community kind of came together and put out a lot of these things where here's some best practices for writing a cookbooks. Here's things that Chef gives you, like roles that really shouldn't be used because they're not very efficient, or they can introduce some pretty big problems if you don't use them correctly. So when Chef became a company, just Chef, they started to get a little more. They started to provide a little more direction, and now with the Chef DK, it used to be to set up a Chef workstation, you had to know how to install Ruby gems, and you had to know how to manage dependencies, and it was a nightmare. So they created this tool set called the Chef DK, and that includes a lot of the third-party tools that grew up around Chef, like Burkshelf and Test Kitchen and Chef Spec and Food Critic. And so they're kind of saying now, hey, here's kind of the way you should be using Chef. And that's helped a lot. And Nick, as someone who is going through this process of learning Chef, I'm kind of jealous because I basically have showed you like, hey, here's what you need to do. Here's how to set up your workstation, and it's not simple and by any means, but it's gotten a lot easier.
There's a couple things I want to highlight from what you're saying. One is, setting up the Chef DK system was very easy. I run on Ubuntu, and I think it took me maybe 5 or 10 minutes to get that part up and running.
So what is that? What is the Chef DK system? What does that mean?
So it's a Chef Development Kit.
Okay.
I assume that's what DK usually stands for.
Yep.
It's just it's the tool set that you need on your computer
To build the scripts.
Yeah, so we should step back a second and kind of explain how Chef works overall. There's kind of 3 components to a Chef system. There is the Chef server, which generally it can either be with the company chef or you can have your own Chef server, and that kind of holds the authoritative configuration, the cookbooks they call them. It holds the knowledge of which nodes you have. It gathers some of the analytics that you have, that kind of thing.
Is it like Git, where like GitHub is a place you can use to store your repositories? So you can store it on their server, or your Chef server can be sitting on a cloud.
Either or. So it's like GitHub, where you can install. You can get your own version of it as well.
Right. Okay. All right.
The Chef DK is something that sits on your personal workstation. So this is how you interact with everything. It allows you to, I'm just scratching the surface, but it allows you to run test deployments, using something like Vagrant. It allows you to, it just gives you all the tools that you need to interact with everything. And then the third piece is the actual nodes, and those are the servers that are being managed by your system. And yeah, those are the 3 things. So you have the Chef server, you have the workstation, which is the Chef DK generally, and then you have the actual nodes. And one thing to note is this whole thing is open source. So when you have a contract with Chef the company, you're generally paying for support and some premium features, like I think you can only get a certain amount of analytics depending on how many nodes you have,
right?
And a couple of other things. But everything in the Chef world is open source. So,
and that's one of the huge benefits with Chef, is that if you're trying to solve a problem, chances are someone has already solved it. And a lot of companies, big companies like Nordstrom, Rackspace, they publish all of their cookbooks open source. So if you need to, for instance, there's a specific Chef, a Drupal cookbook that basically stands up a Drupal environment, whether it's a new one or existing, and that's just open source. If it's on GitHub, so if you want to take that and you want to change it and make some changes that's specific to you or your company, you can do that, or you can just use it right out of the box. And that in itself is one of the big draws to using Chef, is that the open source community around Chef is very large, very active, and very helpful. So even if you're not paying for that Chef, the premium support from Chef itself, getting help on writing cookbooks or implementing Chef in a certain way is pretty easy to get from all the standard IRC, Stack Overflow, the Chef mailing list.
So a cookbook is a set of instructions for a particular node configuration?
Correct.
So here's where the cheesy analogs start to
yeah, that's what I'm trying to figure out what they are.
So basically, to kind of expand on what Nick was saying, you write Chef cookbooks on your local workstation. And with the Chef DK and the other Chef tools like Test Kitchen, you can run those locally against a server like a VM, say Vagrant, and then once you are happy with that unit test and everything, and the cookbook runs successfully, you manage your cookbook code in Git. Chef relies heavily on Git. So if you're not familiar with Git, there's going to be even more of a learning curve. And the cookbooks themselves stay in Git, but they're also uploaded to your Chef server.
Okay.
And when you run the Chef client on a node, or when you run Chef on a node to whether you are bootstrapping it or to update its current state, it's pulling those cookbooks from the Chef server and it's downloading them onto the node. And then the process that's called the Chef run happens, which has basically two phases. There's a compile phase and a converge phase. And Chef actually does not make any changes to your node unless it successfully gets through the compile phase and the converge phase. And then it writes all the changes, and you have a new state on the server. So the cookbook, a part of that, is basically what you write locally on your workstation. And a cookbook is a collection of resources that tell Chef what state you want a node to be in. So it contains recipes, which another food reference, and the recipe is the instructional Ruby code that basically it defines the state of what you want that server to be in. So it tells you what packages you want installed, the versions of those packages. You can copy files either from your workstation or remote files. You can write config files on the server. You can set up users. You can set permissions. Basically, anything you want to do to configure a node, you do in a recipe. And then in the cookbook, you also have attributes, which define certain things in the configuration, and those attributes are what make Chef extremely powerful, because they can be changed on a environment basis, whether or not it's installing on Linux or Windows. You can change your code based on a conditional on the system it's running on. Also, in the cookbooks are other resources you write yourself. So even though there's all these Chef resources, like a package resource, a file resource, you can also write your own resources. Like if you want a custom way to install a Python package or a Drupal module, you can write your own custom Chef resource that handles all of that for you. And then once you have all of these things in a cookbook written and defined and work, you upload them into the Chef server and run them on your node, and the node runs the code that's contained in the cookbooks or multiple cookbooks. You don't have to, it's not just one per server. You can have n number of cookbooks per node, and your node ends up in the state that you want it to be in.
So, Ron, my other question, because earlier I said I had two. I was just gonna see if we got to it, and it sounds like we're kind of in that area. We're talking about this being able to spin up new servers and configure new servers, but could you also use this as a method to update existing servers? So if you have, you've used Chef to set up, n number of servers, and then an update comes, or you need to install, an Apache module or something like that. Would you be able to use Chef to do that?
Sure. Yeah, that's the core of Chef, is being able to iterate on these cookbooks and update them as you make config changes, or say you add a new monitoring agent and you want that deployed to all of your servers. You would add that into your recipe, and then run the Chef client on any of your servers that already have Chef client installed, and any of those changes it would make, and anything else that hasn't changed, Chef does not touch. So it leaves those in whatever state that they were in. It only changes resources on a node if they're changed in the cookbook. So if you added a new monitoring agent, or you changed an environment variable in a config file, Chef's only going to make those changes each time it runs. And if there are no changes to make, it's not going to make any changes. So part of updating a cookbook to make those changes, say a package update or a security update or something, is part of the cookbook, a workflow, just like a software development, where you make the changes, you run test and dev, you promote those changes into the next environment, you run a test on those again. So making updates on systems that already exist is a large part of Chef. Also for disaster recovery, not just losing a node or losing a system, but say your primary DNS service goes down, and you need to add on the fly a secondary DNS or point all your servers to a new node. You would make one change in a cookbook and run that against all of your servers, and you're done. You don't have to.
So if you have, you know, a MySQL server that's serving all the databases for your client, and they suddenly is unreachable, you could spin up another server, and instead of having to log into each server and repoint it, you can just update the cookbook.
Yep.
And push it. Okay.
Yeah, and I'm also thinking of all the things you do over a 2-year period to a server to go and tweak this, tweak that. And when that server crashes and you need to do a rebuild, you can never remember all the stuff you did over a 2-year period. But if you did it through Chef, you've really documented your whole process, and it's easily repeatable. Right. Great.
So what is there? What kind of tools? This is something that's been on my mind. What kind of tools are there for Chef with auditing? So say you're configuring something manually to prepare it, and you're not ready to put in the cookbook yet. Is there a way to have Chef say these are the things that have changed, or these are the things that have been updated, so that to kind of give you a guideline on what recipe you should write?
Out of the box, that like other than what's looking through a source control commit history and saying like here's things that have changed, out of the box, Chef really doesn't do that. It's part of the auditing and compliance features on the Chef server.
Okay.
Chef Delivery, the new offering, has a change management module as part of it. So you can basically, enforce whatever change management you're using in your company already. If you're using RFCs or whatever, and that shows up in the Chef console, and you can say, okay, well, here's what's changed, or here's what needs approval to be changed. But just right out of the box, other than what you're seeing in the source control history.
Okay.
So another question is, does Chef have the capability to be listening for events on a server? So for example, you push out an update, and the Chef client is running on the server, and I don't know, something happens on the server, and you've set up some sort of contingency that if X happens, do Y and Y and Z. Is that something that's possible, or from the node level, or would you have to code that into your cookbook?
The Chef client, since it's a pull only, doesn't really have the ability in itself to respond to an event. So you could write that, whether as a cron script or something. You can say, if this condition exists, run Chef client. You could include that cron script in your Chef cookbook. Like if you have one popular cookbook pattern is to have a base cookbook for all your nodes in a company or for a customer, and that's stuff that you want to run on every single node, no matter what its role is, no matter what it's doing. And you could put that script, say, in your base cookbook to say, anytime this event happens or this condition happens, run Chef client on the server.
Okay.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah, so it sounds like the Chef client isn't really. It's kind of like a one-way thing. It's
right.
like you can turn it on, you can run the cookbooks, but it can't be listening for for server-related stuff that's going on. That would be something that you'd have to rely on the server's systems to do.
Right. Yeah, because
Okay.
it's not really an agent. So.
Gotcha.
So one other question about sort of setup is, if you're going to try this out, can you set up a server and the DK on your local machine?
Oh yeah, yeah. So right out of the box, the Chef DK gives you all the tools that you can, to work with locally. And if you want to use, say, Test Kitchen, it's as easy as just installing a Vagrant and VirtualBox, which are two free open source tools that most devs are already familiar with. And the Test Kitchen module is a Ruby gem that basically automates the entire process of spinning up a VM with Vagrant, SSHing into that VM, transferring all the cookbook files over into the VM, running them, and then once the Chef client is done, you have the VM that's ready to go. You can SSH into it if you want to run some tests or if you want to make any changes. And if you make any changes in your cookbook, it's as easy as just rerunning Test Kitchen, and you already have the VM spun up, and then it converges any of the changes that you just made. You can also, with Test Kitchen, has a bunch of drivers that you can install with it as well for Amazon, for EC2, Azure, Google Cloud, any of the cloud services. So if you wanted to run those tests because you have a specific, say, Amazon code that you want to test, you can have Test Kitchen it will automatically spin up an EC2 instance for you, and then when you're done with it, it destroys it, and you don't have to worry about cleaning up or. So I mean, getting started with Chef in that sense is pretty easy if you just want to play with some cookbooks, and you don't need a Chef server for that because it uses a Chef tool called a Chef Zero, which creates a Chef server in memory completely. So you don't need to have a separate Chef server to manage any of that.
Yeah, I'm looking at the pricing just for people listening. Just to get, so it's free because it's open source to get the Chef client server and Chef DK. That's free. Then they offer the hosted server service, which is $72 a node annually.
Right.
That gives you those same things plus a management console, high availability, and the hosting of the server. Then they have a premium level, which is $127 a node annually, which gets you, looks like all of their offerings, which would also include Chef compliance and analytics on top of that.
And Hosted Chef has a free tier where you get 5 nodes free. So if you just wanted to experiment.
Oh, all right, that's not clear on their website.
Yeah. You do get 5.
Did they just update that? Because I thought when I signed up that you got a fair amount more. You just didn't get the management console, and if you went above a certain level, they would just start to bug you to pay.
That's for the next. That's for if you're running a Chef server on-prem.
Oh, okay.
The hosted a service through Chef, which is just basically a SaaS, is 5 nodes for free.
Okay.
Oh, okay. Now, are there other companies that provide hosting for Chef servers?
Chef is starting to kind of do like the one-button setup. They now offer. There's an Amazon AMI that comes where you basically spin up a Chef server in EC2 and from the Amazon marketplace, and the cost of that includes the cost of the nodes. So that's.
Oh, really?
And it's also the node pricing is prorated. So if you spin up a node for 8 minutes, you're only going to pay for
7. Yeah.
Yeah, like you're not going to get charged $6 a month for one node if you ran it for like an hour to test something on.
Gotcha.
And I believe Amazon's the only one right now where Chef is spinning up, a pre-configured a Chef server on-prem to host, which of course you would need your own AWS account for. So.
Right. Okay. What should we go to next, guys? Here, what other things you want to chat about here?
I kind of want to bring it back to Drupal if we can. And I'm wondering, this is going to be more of a question, I think, for Ron and Nick, as to, how do we do that? Is there a way to bring Chef, which is very much, server DevOps sort of server DevOps sort of tool? How do we bring that back into to the Drupal space?
So it's a good question. I think one of the ways that Chef can be useful for developers just looking to start out is that testing environment, like just the ability to set up a testing environment locally or on another server very quickly that is an exact replica of production. And Chef, I think, is a pretty powerful piece of the continuous integration pipeline as well. So if you have a lot of test unit tests to run, you're setting up Behat or something, then Chef is a good way to not just always have a bunch of servers running all the time when you only need to run the tests when something gets pushed. Can you maybe talk a little bit about that, Ron? How Chef fits into the CI?
Yeah, sure. So there's also a Chef resource, a deploy resource that can be used to actually deploy code. So depending on your deployment strategy for getting code, it works kind of like Capistrano does. It's modeled after that. So, but as far as the continuous integration aspect of things, sure, you can tie a Chef in with a CI server or a build server like Jenkins, and you can basically have Chef configure a test environments for you on the fly, and you can basically hook that into commits, whether it's source control or if you have a QA department or something and they need to test, then they could spin up new instances and bootstrap them with Chef, and once the testing is done, shut them down, and you're not paying for that cost. Or if you want to make a quick change to test something on the fly that you're exploring or thinking about doing, Chef is a great way to do that, because you can make that change in a cookbook and have your whatever test instance that you're spinning up incorporate that change, and if it doesn't work, you can go back and change it, and Chef will roll back the changes for you, or just spin up a new instance. So in a testing scenario, any type of a config management tool is going to be helpful in that situation.
Yeah, so it's kind of similar to how config management is being handled with Drupal 8 now, where you just have a way that you can manage it and keep track of it. It's just one level below the Drupal level. It's on the actual hardware or VM, but it's a way to keep track of that and manage it and quickly make changes.
Hey, I want to go back to the comment, Nick, that you made that it's useful to quickly spin up a copy of a live system to do some testing on. Like, can we talk about what that means for a minute? So let's say from a Drupal perspective, right? So today, if I want to do that in a Drupal world, I basically go to a server, and I'm assuming I already have a server up and running. But so this is the piece where Chef helps you, because you can just spin up a node for it. But I'm going to go and I'm going to do a pull from a Git repository to get all the code down, then I'm going to modify some configuration files, then I'm going to do a backup and migrate maybe, or a SQL dump on the live server and import that on the new server. Is there a scenario here where Chef can do all of those steps from the live server to the new server and that kind of thing? You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah. So the question is, I think the big question here is, are you able to do things like pull from a Git repo and then clone a database from a specific location?
Yeah. That
Um,
those are steps I'm wondering. Other than getting a server to use, those are the things that take time to do.
Yeah, so that's a question more for Ron than me.
Yeah. So there's a Chef by itself can handle, you know, pulling down a Git repo of a certain commit. It can handle if there's any like post deploy scripts you need to run. You could definitely handle that with Chef.
Yep.
Getting the SQL dump and actually performing that dump on another server is probably something that Chef isn't going to do on the fly.
Yeah.
But let's say you previously have automated your SQL dumps and you're doing a daily backup or something, and you're putting that in a maybe an S3 bucket or an NFS server or something where it's available to all your servers. You could easily have Chef pull that in and import it into MySQL on whatever new server you're spinning up. Okay. So actually performing the dump on the server you're trying to replicate is probably a little bit outside Chef. Mm-hmm. But if your process already has those dumps happening somewhere and they're available, then you could easily automate that with Chef.
Gotcha. And we actually could do that. You could do it with Drush and aliases. Drush is a command line tool that we use in the Drupal world. So you could just add the alias to the production server, and you can just run the SQL. I forget the command, but it's the mirror command. It grabs the database from the live server and imports it. So we could even handle that piece too.
Okay, so there you go.
But it's also now that you mentioned how the other pieces work, it kind of clicked. But it's also useful for some of the project that we worked on over the summer that had a couple of different Varnish servers, a couple of different Apache servers. If you needed to test configuration changes, it would be a fairly significant project, for that client. Whereas if everything had been in Chef, it'd just be the few hours that we'd have the 5 or 6 machines spun up, make the changes. So.
Wow. Okay. It's tools like this that you talk about that suck the life out of you, right? Because it's really interesting, and I'd love to learn how to use it because I could see benefits in things that I'm doing, but I could also see this could be a time suck, right? To learn this thing.
It's any kind of buy-in on these types of tools are paradigm shifts. It's not just a bash script that you write, you spin up once and you throw away. So there is definitely some buy-in and some upfront time requirements.
So to Stephen's point, Ron, if somebody were interested in Chef and wanted to take the uber easy way out, would they be able to contract with you to do this, or do you offer trainings for people to kind of get them set up with this?
Personally, I don't currently. I have plenty of work to keep me busy at the time. So Chef has a lot of great training resources, even on the site itself. There's a tutorial series for each major OS. There's Linux, there's Windows. A good place to also start is Chef does a lot of meetups in many cities, and they do beginner level, intermediary level. They offer paid training, of course, and really, I mean, Google is your best friend in this case because there's so much information out there and best practices and ways to do things. So I would say if you don't already have somebody you can grab who knows Chef, then I would start with the Chef site itself, and then start looking in your community for Chef meetups.
So osmosis. Osmosis is the best way to go.
With Chef, yeah. It can be pretty daunting at first, but if you have someone who's used it a little bit and can kind of pull you in the right direction, that helps a lot.
So I'm sitting here looking at my notes as we're about to wrap up here from a server migration I did 6 months ago, and I'm thinking to myself, boy, wouldn't that have been awesome right now if this was in a cookbook with a recipe, and it's all those steps that you need to do. It's all of the files, the PHP files that need all the settings changed, installing Drush. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. And it's not a huge list, but it would be awesome just to push a button and have that work.
There you go.
Okay, great. All right. Why don't we move on to our module of the week? John, I think you posted this in here, right?
Yeah, the module of the week this week is disable messages.
Sorry, my mouse just decided to run out of battery. Yeah, so disable messages. I had a scenario where there was an error message appearing on a client site. And in Drupal, by default, you have options to disable the error message from writing to the screen completely and just have it write to the watchdog logs. And that's usually what you want to do on production sites, but sometimes it's helpful from an admin point of view to be prompted with those error messages so you can track down where they're coming from. And this module actually extends the permission set for Drupal warnings, error messages, so that you can basically, per role, set who can see those messages and who can override them. So here now you have the ability to enable this module, go into the permissions and say, oh, I just want these error messages to show up for admins, and that's it. It really solved a specific problem for me. I don't know that I would recommend using it on every site, but it definitely was useful to hide the message from everybody else and allow me to still troubleshoot it and figure out what was causing it.
Very cool. I know I've used it in the past a couple of times, but it's very useful.
All right, very good. So we're coming to the end of episode number 109. Chef, Ron, thank you for taking the time today and joining us. I think we give a pretty good description of what Chef does and have pointed people and sort of clarified in their minds if this is a tool for them that I think they have enough to get started anyway. I know I do. Excellent. I'm glad I could help. And this was actually my first podcast experience, so thank you guys for making it not dreadful. It was actually a pleasure. Well, you survived. That's great. So Ron, if people are looking to connect with you, sure. Or if you choose them to not connect with you, that's fine too. But if they're looking to talk to you more about Chef or anything else that you're doing, where would they find you online? Twitter's the easiest. I am at Neverminding on Twitter. Neverminding, just. And LinkedIn, of course, is the gold standard nowadays, it seems. Those are probably the easiest ways to get in touch with me, since I monitor those quite frequently. All right, great. John, how about you? John Picozzi from Oomph. Where can people find you, track you down?
Oh, man. You can track me down all over the internet. I'm on all the major social networks at John Picozzi, and always on at oomphinc.com.
And romping through the woods in Tiverton this weekend looking for a Christmas tree.
That is true. You can also check out my latest blog post on translation. If you were at NEDCamp and you saw my talk or missed my talk, I wrote a blog post to go along with it. So you can check that out at oomphinc.com/notes.
Awesome. I will check that out. I'm doing some translation stuff right now, and I appreciate you answering my questions at 11 o'clock last night.
Oh, that's the best time to answer the questions.
Thank you. And Nick Laughlin, how about you?
You can find me online pretty much everywhere at Nixvan, Nicxvan. Feel free to tweet me or send me any questions.
Excellent. And I'm Stephen Cross, Twitter at Stephen Cross with a PH. I do have a personal blog too, stephencross.com. There's not much on there, but I did post one a few weeks ago about Drupal 8 migration. So if you need to migrate a Drupal 6 or Drupal 7 website to 8, the migration tools are actually really solid. So you should start by taking a look at that. And I have some notes at stephencross.com on how to do that, and they work pretty good. So good luck with you. And I would advise that you go to IRC because they're awesome on there to get some support if you have any migration issues. And I think that's a wrap, guys. We are hitting our 2 o'clock deadline.
Fabulous.
All right, so talk to you soon. Take care.
In a couple weeks.
Great. Have a good
Thanks.
one.
Bye.